do you know if your entries are going to be worthwhile, or if customs is looking at it, or what the heck is customs looking at, or how do we go through all that? I would call this more of a kind of a sidebar strategy on maybe judging how well you're doing as an importer or exporter.
In this day and age, of course, most, if not all, of the conversations that we hear somehow in one way or another will involve software.
Oh, you can't do anything today without some software. The old hard copy files and going through it, and they're gonna look at it and all that. It's just too much data, too many changes. I mean, Lalo, you're right on the money on that one.
Right. Cindy Allen, who hosts another episode, or episodes here on our podcast, and who is also pretty close to our next guest, Hugo. And Hugo, I'm going to pronounce your last name here in a little bit, but I hope I don't. Pakula or Pakula?
Pakula, yeah.
Pakula.
Okay, cool. So I knew it was one of those two. So, but anyway, I wanted to say about Cindy. She says that compliance isn't getting harder because the rules are changing. It's getting harder because enforcement is getting smarter. Yeah. So she pretty much summarized it there, and that's almost the kind of like the framework to what we are gonna be talking today to Hugo. Hugo does own his own company, Tru Identity, and he recently put out a press release regarding CBP, a program that his company and CBP are working on together. We'll hear a little bit more about that, although this is not necessarily a show to promote that relationship or anything. We're more talking about, like, is customs enforcement genuinely changing? Is it really changing? And if it is, what do importers and brokers need to worry about or need to be prepared with? And Hugo has a lot of good information on that. He's put out several webinars, and I'm sure you can see the replays here on his website. And we'll have his contact information for LinkedIn. We'll have his website. And I'll put a link also to the press release that they had with CBP on the show notes. But you'll find quite a bit of content that you'll be able to listen in and tune in for Hugo of some of the content he's been putting out. But Andy, I don't know if you have anything else other than
welcome, Hugo. This is going to be a good discussion, but it's one of those things where your perspective I'm really going to be interested in looking a little bit different. This is going to be kind of thought-provoking. Hopefully you don't scare the pants off of us.
Thankfully, I'm not the fearmonger. I'm not that guy, which is great. I think there's always an opportunity and a silver lining. But I will say I spent years and years advising Congress, House Ways and Means, Senate Finance Committee on trade policy. I think this is a much more friendly environment to talk about what's going on. So I think that's a good place to start.
Well, excellent. So from your perspective here, I guess let me first stop and say Tru Identity. What is Tru Identity, since that's your company, real quick?
Sure. Tru is a customs compliance automation platform, right? And that means it's, we don't think about it as how do we reduce your costs or reduce, allow you to do more. It really is, this environment is changing. Cindy said it really well, right? It's fundamentally changed from 6 months ago, a year ago, even from 5 years ago, right? We saw the e-commerce boom. We saw customs change their attitude towards enforcement. It's not a facilitation environment, and you need something to be able to respond to that. And that is fundamentally what we built. It's a culmination of my learnings of 10 years of building other technology for logistics and seeing policy with the government. So there's a lot in there, and I think there's a lot to unpack, but I'd love to focus on policy.
Well, I guess one of the questions I've got, your process and all that helps, obviously customs is using it, but I'm assuming that it's going to help an importer work smarter, not harder.
It's a great way to say it. I think about what's fundamentally changed is you have, as a customs broker, you've had this 19 CFR responsible for movement control requirement all this time. But what's evolved is there's so much going on and so many changes. How do you make sure you're doing this responsibly? So actually we look at it like a a 19 CFR automation platform, right? You have this responsible requirement, responsible control and supervision requirement. And that is what this actually enables. And maybe I'd even say it to get down to the sort of root of it, I'd actually say that half of the work of what you have to do now is be compliant. That's very important. It's more important than ever that you're actually compliant. The other half is that you can demonstrate your compliance, is that you can provably be compliant. And if you can do that and master that at scale, you're the winning service provider, right? How do you show an importer? We're doing that work when you show up to a quarterly business review as an importer. How do you know if your broker's really doing their job and making and showing up for you correctly to customers, representing you to customers? Because ultimately they work for you. They don't work for customers. They're making sure that you're meeting your requirements, meeting your compliance requirements, so that your goods are delivered on time. You're not paying extra fees, and you're not getting penalties and audits on the bad side.
Well, and the thing there is demonstrating that you're compliant. Your system hopefully will identify any red flags, I guess, or something before there's a problem. Before, like for example, if a shipment's coming in, prior to arrival, you're going to see some red flags going off, going, hey, as an importer, something's not matching up, or something to that effect, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think an issue has been for the last easily 10, but more years, is that you don't find out about an issue until it's at the port, sitting with CBP, and now they've said we're holding your cargo. Right.
And you're reacting to it rather than responding to something before, like an advance notice. And that's the thing too, is that customs is looking at and using this. And if there's information this is what I call it is vital that information is synchronized between the bill of lading and the commercial invoice, any special declarations on. If there's a conflict in that, customs is looking at what's being presented to them, and it's going to identify, hey, there's a problem. Values don't match up, or country of origins don't match up, or descriptions don't match up. You said it was a widget A and it comes in as widget B, and on the paperwork, which is it, right?
Yeah, and you see things like this, and I think people feel this adversarial fear with CBP, but actually CBP has sort of the same desire. They'd love to be able to tell you that something is wrong in advance. They would prefer that certainly fraudulent goods, but also that incorrect filings were fixed way in advance of the goods arriving, because it just fills up your CFS. You've got a freight station that just is filled with stuff that could have been fixed in advance. And they would like to solve this problem too. And actually, that's what they're doing, is they're leveraging technology now and partners who have this data earlier and are able to say, everything's good here. Right? We've already done these checks extensively. And I really like Cindy's way of looking at this as well, which is they have 30 years of history, right? They've seen this before. I promise, you're not doing anything that special. They have seen it before, right? And so they would love if you could prove that work way earlier and demonstrate your compliance.
Well, with all that being said, I guess we've kind of set the stage here that customs is using it. You need to be, again, working smarter, not harder. So the point being is that, again, utilizing tools that will improve, in a sense, it improves your productivity. And I say that from a standpoint of catching, discrepancies well before there's a problem, so that you have a chance to fix it as an importer. But all that to say, what do you believe that the industry, as far as the importing community, let's look at it that way, what should the industry be focusing on then? What do you see?
Yeah. I think the hardest part is that we've been inundated with things you could do, right? There are so many.
Yes.
Everybody,
it's like information overload.
Totally. And it is drinking from a fire hose. And so when we talk about what you can really do, or where you should be focusing, I think there is a lot of focus on using technology. That's like the talk, right? We talked about at the beginning, the top of the episode, right? you can't avoid the technology conversation now. But maybe that's for good reason. And I think that's this pressure, mounting pressure of 10 years of more and more expectations from customers, more and more expectations of shareholders in importer companies, right? And so when you talk about what you can do, I think you have to first recognize the environment has changed, right? We're not in an environment where CBP not doesn't care about the entries, but they're looking more closely than ever. And so actually talk about what to do. The answer here is being able to be provably compliant is at least the trend, if not the answer to this question. It's not about maybe just doing more. If you focus on only adding the ability to do more entries, more shipments, you're actually multiplying your burden, right? By adding more, you come out the other side with more audits, more penalties. And so the most important thing today is that you are able to get to more compliant. And the answer to that is great quality master data.
Well, with that, there was an executive order that was issued regarding customs enforcement. For the listeners, it's Executive Order 14411 or 14411. What about that? Obviously from the president's office, he's obviously sanctioned an effort for enforcement. What are the focuses of that executive order, and what's the impact both on the customs brokers, but the importers as well?
Yeah, so that executive order laid out a timeline. Basically, it installed a 45-day, 90-day, 180-day, and 1-year milestone where different agencies need to do certain things. And so we're just approaching the 90-day milestone of September 1st, which is where CBP and DHS are required to provide revised penalty and mitigation strategies. In fact, we've already seen this come into effect where you can now only mitigate penalties to 50%, right? That strategy is now, I don't want to say completely defunct, but it is can no longer be sort of this crutch for importers who say, well, at least if we get in trouble, we can mitigate, right? Mitigation is very limited. And what they're doing even further, I've actually got my eye on the November 30 date, which is where this complete shift in enforcement is happening again. So if you felt it already, what's coming on the November 30 date is that instead of looking at an individual shipment or an individual product for what it appears to be, they're actually looking at you as a company. They're saying, how does your import history, or how does if you're a brokerage, what do your entries look like as a whole? And so you can no longer get away with one erroneous shipment. It's not really one. That pattern exists everywhere. So if you're not auditing and re-auditing and setting up your systems to do that, you're going to come under the enforcement mandate.
Okay. How long is this going to go on? I mean, this is a scenario where it looks like the facilitation is dead and gone kind of a thing, and it's now into enforcement, but business has got to go on. So, I mean, how do you handle this? Especially if you're a small or medium-sized company, you can be scared to death in looking at some of this.
I would say for small or medium, I actually think one of the tricks is to continue to act small. You can do things that the big guys can't. Don't think about this like you have to meet the same technology burden, right? CBP is the largest enterprise in all of this whole discussion, right? They've got 60,000 employees. They've also got $3.5 billion to deploy new solutions. You don't have no one has $3.5 billion, even the largest companies.
Right.
So the answer, everybody sort of falls in that bucket, which is you need to measure your risk, understand it, right? I hear a lot of board discussions going on where they don't even care. They don't even prioritize it. So you've got to make the case that this matters because you've probably already started feeling it. And if we're just at the beginning of this ramp up. So it is the best time that people at the forefront of compliance started solving this problem 6 months ago. The second best time to do it is right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the impact of this would be an increase in examinations or CF28s and 29s, or what are you seeing in this? Is there a slower process in the clearance, or are more entries getting processed and they're focusing on problems?
Through all of this, the volume isn't going anywhere, right? Volume's coming. We have to be able to handle it. And I guess the answer to that question is really that CBP have been able to narrow their focus to find the right stuff, where they're actually doing almost the exact same amount of audits. We looked, it's up at something like 11%, but their results are up about 5,000%, right, over the same period. So they're not doing more auditing; they're just finding it faster and finding it better. And so it's a lot more that really they're able to look at everything. And that's the hard part for an importer is, well, hold on, we have hundreds of shipments, thousands of shipments. How are we supposed to look at? You probably can't look at everything. So learning from who's doing it the best, which I think is arguably CBP at the moment, it is you need a system that is looking and supporting your people to action only the most important items.
And that's a good point, Hugo, because part of the argument that has been made, and even Cindy has said it before and others on our episodes, and even when we go to conferences, the point is that part of what Cindy said, even that CBP, the tools that they're using are getting smarter. The thing is that you may be at 100% doing everything right, and you may be doing following all the procedures, you might be filing your USMCA's correctly, you may be doing everything perfectly, right? The problem is that because of all the tools that CBP may have access to now, is that they might be vetting, or not vetting, but they may be looking at someone in your supply chain. And unbeknownst to you, they might be wrong, right? Because there might be several tiers down your supply chain. Something may be wrong on their process. But because CBP knows that you touch their supply chain, they'll go after you, to not necessarily to find something wrong, but to ask you questions, correct? And that's where it's going to become a challenge for you to keep up, because you do need to make sure that you do have those tools and that compliance in order, so that if they do come knocking, you're like, well, here it is.
I think that's where people feel this idea of the black box with CBP. It's like, we don't know what they're going to bring to us. We don't even know the issue. We've looked at our first tier supply. We've looked at our suppliers. Our manufacturer seems to be compliant, but you don't know where they're getting their raw materials to sell you something, right? You have no idea. And so I think considering that CBP has what feels like, to me at least, an unlimited budget. $3.5 billion is an unfathomable sum of money to advance, like the most advanced solutions, where they're now so far ahead of the industry when they used to be behind. We all used to feel like, gee, we have our data together. Like I'm looking at everything. I think I'm doing well. We're not getting audits. But CPP were behind. Now they're so ahead with technology. You sort of have no choice but to be looking and analyzing the data the same way they are, at least learning that methodology and listening to the people who know CBP's methodology is another thing. A piece of advice I'd give is, they are working with partners. Listen to those partners. That's the point, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Who should importers be benchmarking off of? Who's doing it right?
It's a really, unfortunately, a very hard question to answer. I think I do think when I sort of tongue in cheek, but I do think CBP is doing it right, right?
Mm-hmm.
They found a way to deliver results for the policy mandate that they've been given. And now our job is to respond, just like you guys said, the whole point of Global Trading Center, right? It's what do we do now that it's here? And so when you think of the best of the best, they are building, they're cleaning their data so that you can actually do this analysis, very similar to what CBP is doing. How do we store, not just maybe where do we store, but how do we store even that data? Like an example would be, you've got your 99 codes, storing them and they're up to date, and the tariffs change. Well, now your data technically isn't clean. Now you've got to do it all from scratch. You've got to reanalyze your tariff applicability. You've got to reanalyze stacking and sequencing and all that stuff. Instead, if you say, well, what is this product made of? Does it have steel? Does it have aluminum? If you can say, yes, it has steel, and yes, it has aluminum, well, then recalculating 99s using a modern system is actually very easy, right? Because it can analyze the policy, and that's what CBP is doing. They're saying, well, we know something about your supply chain that you don't know, the actual underlying factor, the material composition, the manufacturer that's involved in the production, where you're getting your raw materials, even if it's unbeknownst to you. And then they're calculating what they expect an entry to look like. And they're saying, well, there's a discrepancy here. Something's wrong. Or there's a violation of some, an anti-dumping countervailing duty or forced labor or something else. But I think for the people trying to do it right, it's about saying, we have limited resources, CBP have limited resources. They have technology. Do we have the right technology? Is a piece of it. And do we have the right process? And do we have the right people to be able to do that analysis at scale?
I guess another way of asking Andy's question about who's doing it right, maybe let's go back and kind of like reverse engineer it. And let me ask you this way. When you go into a client, a broker and or an importer, and you look at their process before you even automate it or anything like that, what do you see that might indicate, okay, they might have a compliance issue or they're doing compliance correctly, and here's how we can help, regardless if they're going to use your system or not? But like, what, you know what I'm saying? Like how can you improve that, be it manually or through the software, whatever the case might be, because of what you know that CBP, or what you may suspect or what you have seen that CBP is using on automation?
I think about coverage. I think that you've got a volume of things coming, you know, that you're dealing with every day. How do you make sure you really have your eyes on everything? And so I always started the process, to your point, regardless of us, in our technology. I think about, I watch what they're doing. I've sat, next to an entry writer for a broker, or even with the importer doing the work manually. And I can see that they've got all this reactive work to be managing every day. And what's hard is you need the time to do the proactive work. That's what fundamentally nowadays moves the needle. If you can make the time for that, it's so valuable.
Hugo, let me jump in. I noticed something that you, one of your LinkedIn posts that you'd put in, and there was a survey apparently done that almost half of senior executives, no, excuse me, 2/3 of senior executives of companies say that compliance, import compliance, is very important. However, only 22% of the companies responded saying that that company was adequately funding the compliance function. To that point, where do you think companies, maybe they're over investing in a certain area, or they're under investing, and they need to reset their priorities a little bit here?
Yeah.
That's a big question, though.
Yeah. Firstly, I think it makes me sad, just to put that out there. I feel like we meet these professionals every day at conferences and in meetings, and everybody in this industry cares about their work. They just want to do their best work, and they know this stuff. They know the subject matter, but the business doesn't prioritize it. And I think part of that comes down to, I think the headlines hurt that, right? I think they read, oh, AIBA, is ineligible, and then they don't get into the details. We want to focus on the details. That's what makes me excited as a trade nerd, right? But when you think about where they've spent money, and I think a lot of executives, but also even trade compliance teams, have spent money on technology that led them down a bad road before, right? We've all been there and had the fatigue. Now we have the fatigue of technology. It's failed, the implementation failed or something. So when I think about why that happens, I think there's some historical, it's a look backwards. I also think that people are spending money potentially in the wrong place. And that's why, say, a compliance professional says, they're not prioritizing it right. And that's because the executive leadership, I can say this as an executive, are not looking at what's coming. They're really looking at what's here today, right? People focus on the quarter, on the month, sometimes on the year, but they're not in the weeds of these CSMS messages at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. They're not in the weeds of implementing this work. And so they're saying, we want more volume. That's the wrong answer. The answer is it, enforcement is coming like we've never really seen, honestly, never seen before. And if we're not preparing, we're going to pay for it later, right? We are, it's a known quantity now. We're going to pay for it later.
Well, and you're hitting a good point, is that look at where customs has changed today versus, even a couple years ago, 5 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. There's a dramatic difference. And like you said, in that time frame, customs has gone from behind the industry to leapfrogging and well ahead of the industry. Where do you see customs going, let's say within the next 5 years? How do you see customs, how are they shaping their future, and how are they going to be interacting with the community?
Yeah, I'll start with answering that. In the last 6 months, we saw beginning of the year, we saw a ruling come down from CBP on AI, HQ 722, and it sent this shockwave through the industry that I think is a little strange personally, because I look at it as a compliance junkie, and I say all that ruling said was customs business is customs business, and it must be done by a customs broker. And to me, that's not a shock. And I actually think that's a great thing. I think that's what the law says. I think that's how it should be. I think that puts the licensed customs broker in a seat of power as well. They're supposed to be trusted. But I also think that when you look at what's coming and how CBP is approaching this, they're saying, I think they are, the way I see it is that they're looking at the future of responsible supervision and control. And there is a definition change that has to come. When you read 19 CFR, it says that you are responsible for the personnel in your team, in your company. But the problem with that is now we have technology doing work for us. And actually, 19 CFR doesn't mention technology once, right? Not once. So I think part of this long-term impact is a reshuffle or maybe an updated definition of what it means to run a brokerage responsibly, what it means to exercise reasonable care as an importer responsibly. And that is in partnership with technology, right? It's just another tool like Excel overhaul the way that we all do our work. AI is probably doing the same thing, but it's not replacing anything. And so when you look at the long-term impact, I think about it as the entry is becoming very commoditized, right? We see that through the price of the entry. Price has come down so significantly, while at the same time, the work has gone up. And that's totally backwards. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to give the licensed customs broker maybe the power again, right? We are supposed to be doing proactive work. We are supposed to be supporting our business partners, our business executives, or if you're a broker, supporting your customer in being strategic and looking ahead and getting away from issues. If you're just thinking about today, you can't get there. And that's what CBP actually wants to support, even if sometimes it doesn't feel like it. I have maybe a hot take about this, which is I really believe that this industry in many ways is going back to basics.
Mm-hmm.
So much of what matters now is what mattered 10 plus years ago, where it was, what is the product? What is it made of? Who is involved in making it, and what's its intended use? If you can answer those questions again as an importer, let alone getting that information from your broker, you are so empowered for success today. It is so back to basics. And the answer here is that if you could store that correctly, if you have that data and you submit that master data for your products, is the key to success, not only for the importer on their own, but for that relationship between you and the broker. If you have that in place, you're so ready for success.
Hugo, I think you hit something right there that is vitally important. Ideally, if I have a piece of paper that has the commercial invoice and everything in it, it has everything there that as a broker, I could pick it up as an entry writer, look at it, and I don't have to go look at a database. Everything comes through it. Now, if it's electronic, it could go into the entry system, But then the other side of that is then you have the software that double checks it to say, is everything right? What do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I see that people maybe understand the idea, right? They see this North Star of what you described, but the path is really unclear. And often the answer feels like the business answer, which is we have to be faster or we have to be more efficient. And if we're more efficient, everything else will resolve. But we need that foundation. And I actually look at this through three, what seem like confounding variables, but they can work together is speed, accuracy, and control. And those levers, you increase speed, your accuracy should go down in theory, right? You increase, when you do that, then your control is lower because your accuracy is lower. So maybe a way to think about it is you have to be able to move those levers together, and the only way to do that is to build the foundation. When you have that foundation in place, speed will get better in a huge way. You will reduce repeat work. I see people auditing and then re-auditing and then re-auditing, or QC and quality control again and again and again, but still getting failures at customs. Right? And how do you resolve that problem? Right? You're going to sit there and not show results for a long time. I really think there are answers to these problems that can take 3 to 6 months, not 3 to 5 years. And we're not on a 3 to 5 year timeline. CBP is looking right now.
What would you say, what would be the key takeaway as we finish up here for an executive? You're talking to the leadership here. What is the key action that they need to walk away from this show?
Ultimately, compliance is a lever for growth. It is not a cost center. They don't seem to understand it when it's said as, 99s and impact and dollars and penalties. It just doesn't resonate. The opportunity that sits in front of you is that you and your competitors all have to send your entries to CBP. Everybody's got the same problem. Mm-hmm. And so the advantage, in fact, a competitive advantage, is that if you're an importer, you can be doing impact analysis, strategic recommendations for sourcing, forecasting, right? That's super valuable when it's done, when it's prioritized. And that doesn't even maybe need more budget. But to have the time to be proactive, that can take a little bit of budget.
Well, listen, we appreciate you. And Lalo, as we go into this again, this is one of those things where this is an outstanding discussion, I think, and something that's important for companies to take into account. Well, folks, we again appreciate your listenership. Like us, share us. We really need you to take some action there and to keep us going. It's we're really fortunate, and people seem to be really catching on to Simply Trade. So we ask for you to continue that. And with that, thank you so much, Hugo, Lalo. Everybody have a great day.